doubtless, one of the most important topics that we have discussed here at the Hispanic Leadership Summit, doubtless, the most important priority across every piece of research is education. How do we actually use this education priority to scale up education opportunities for every Hispanic is what we're going to be discussing now. Upward mobility has been brought in every single session. How do we actually make sure that we're ready for the future? So I'm pleased to invite our two distinguished panelists to talk about this issue. We're going to be looking at opportunities, but also about what can we do together. So if I may, Dr. Flores, if you don't mind, if you don't mind, just like starting with a sense of what is HACU. What is HACU? Everybody knows HACU, but what is HACU's priorities right now, particularly after a year of COVID, and where the educational objectives that you have for the future of the community, if you don't mind?
Sure. No, thank you for that question. Of course, HACU now represents way over 500 colleges and universities across the country that collectively enroll more than 2 out of every 3 Hispanics in college today, and there is 3.8 million altogether. And so our priorities really remain the ones that gave birth to the organization, which are to champion Hispanic success in higher education. And to do that, right now, we are focusing on several things. Number one, we're pushing, in fact, legislation as we speak in Congress, something called the HERE Act. And that act was introduced by Congressman Joaquin Castro on behalf of HACU and a number of co-signers on both sides of the aisle to promote greater collaboration between what we call Hispanic serving institutions, those that have 25% or more Latino enrollment, which is more than 500 of them, and school districts where we have high concentrations of Hispanic students, with the intent of creating more and better pathways to success for them, so that there is a seamless transition from K-12 to higher ed, with very clear intentions of getting them to go not just onto college per se, but of course that's the broad aim, but also into fields of study where we have fewer Latinos and active. And so there is a major push on our part as an association, because we want our college universities, which make up the base of our association, to be proactive and to reach out to those K-12 districts, and for the K-12 districts to be also very receptive and willing to work with them, collaborate with them, again, to promote greater success rates in terms of graduating from high school at higher rates, and with the right background in terms of the curriculum and math, science, English, and so forth. But then also moving up as far as they can, not just to associate's degrees or bachelor's degree, but all the way up to PhDs. To collaborate also more closely, not just K-12 and higher ed, but within higher ed, more collaboration between community colleges, regional universities, and those top research universities, with the goal of pushing them as far as they can go. But we need that HERE Act so that Congress puts down significant resources and create the impetus for much more collaboration between K-12 and higher ed. So that's our big push right there.
Yeah, and I love, we'll unpack it even more. Yeah, we'll unpack it in this session. There's so much there. I would love to talk to you about, like, what are the roles that we need, like the strategic roles that we need in the administration to make sure that this passes and all that. Let me just go back to Josue. Josue, you look great in your new gig. Now that you moved from Salesforce to be the chief operating officers of the Zuckerberg Foundation, tell us about what the role of education plays in, like in the strategic landscape that you see the foundation moving forward.
Yeah, thank you very much, Claudia, for inviting me here to be part of the panel and to be part of the Hispanic Leadership Summit. You know that I really am very supportive of everything that you have been doing. And to address specifically education and the change, for me, I took a very cautious, obviously, in my career path, always looking in a place that I could continue to develop what is very important for me. And there are two things. One is Latinos, Hispanic. The community for me, as being from Mexico City, coming to this country, and now being this home, I really care about how can we improve the state of how many people are, building this country, where they are, and so on. And the Child Zuckerberg initiative, from the moment that it was created, Priscilla and Mark, they were very much embedded into education. And education for them is a big part of how we can contribute to improve society and to make this a better world. And part of is right now is one of our biggest initiatives here in CCI. We do have several places where we fund many of the nonprofits that are in the forefront of creating, in this case, opportunities for many Hispanic or low-income kids from all low-income backgrounds, the opportunities to thrive. And not because of the way that you look, the outcomes should be expected. And that's what we dedicate a lot of our efforts, from a programmatic perspective and the funding, to the other part, which is the technology. Because what is important as well is technology is disrupting a lot of education, as we all know. And to make sure that technology is also a catalyzer, we call it always, when I was even in Salesforce, is a place to level the playing field and make sure that people will have some of the opportunities that they couldn't necessarily have in the traditional systems. So I'm very glad to hear what Dr. Flores was talking about, because a lot of this has to do with policies and how we're going to be driving the needle, and the administrations and the governments, state, local, federal, they all have to chime in. But we're also doing our part within philanthropy. And philanthropy is quite important right now, especially in this pandemic and this situation. 2020, has been a very challenging year for many people, as we all know. But we also saw a shift there, and we saw that children, in this case, where we are, more focused on, they're very vulnerable about, that social aspect. And what Dr. Flores was talking about in very early stages. What are the opportunities that they have to secure their path, not only graduating from high school or going into college, but even further postgraduate degrees. Nowadays, we're looking into how important it is for children to be interacting with other fellow students, but also with their teachers. And it has also brought us to rethink some of the products that we have right now, and see where the next iteration of technology is going to be helping children, and in this case students and young adults as well, continue their career. So we're very much supportive of education, and there's still a lot of work ahead of us.
And you both share, you've been very open. I mean, I don't know whether it's through the Chan Zuckerberg initiative, sorry, not foundation initiative, Dreamers and DACA, and making sure that, during this path, so you, you guys probably have a message for all the audience here about what can we do, regardless on the industry where you are, to support this movement and make sure that this is one of the things that you want to advocate for. I do have a question, and I will let you have a message at the end on whatever you want the call to action to be for everybody. But we hear all the time, education is a big spectrum, and Dr. Flores, you just said it, is the path to success, right, to progress. And if we're looking at upward mobility as the bigger sort of umbrella that we all know we want to aim the Hispanic community to go, we hear a lot about pre-K, just like early childhood development, and then we also hear that there's a problem in high school attention, attrition. Sorry, not attention maybe too, but attrition. Where do you think is the priority, Dr. Flores? Where would you put, if you would have, if you would have to prioritize, what do you think is really a transformative intervention? And is it true that high school attrition is really still a big problem because the numbers seem to suggest progress.
Right. No, I think we have made significant progress over the years. I came to HACU now more than 20 years ago, and I seen, for instance, on the dropout rate, it used to be like 45, 50% in some years. Is now less than 10% among Hispanics. And it's approximating the national average, which is even lower a little bit. So in terms of entrance to college, same thing. Now, upon completion of high school, Latinos enroll in college at the same rate as white students, or even higher rates. Okay, and if you look at the demographics over the long haul, the only demographic that is really feeding higher education significantly to keep the numbers up in terms of national enrollment is Latinos. All of the other groups are either at a level or going down. A level, you have Asian Americans and you have African Americans because their population is not growing as fast, or in the case of Asian Americans, they already are way up here in terms of enrollment. So they don't move the needle much higher than they are already. But in the case of Anglos, it's going down. They are going down because of the numbers. So basically, your question has to do more with, okay, where do we put most of our effort behind? And I don't think that necessarily is how I will approach the issue, but right now we have to assess obviously where the need is greater, but every step of the way, I think we need to intervene in different ways. Okay, to me, I'm an educator by training, so I tend to think of education, and a lot of people use the metaphor of the pipeline, but the pipeline has a lot of leakage points along the continuum, some bigger than others. And to me, that is caused by the transitions that occur in the lives of kids. This is why the key word in my mind is articulation across all those transition points. How can we articulate those different segments of the pipeline so that those transition points don't become leaking points for our community? And that's really what I think we need to address in a very judicious way, so that the resources are applied the way in the amounts and in the ways that it should be applied, so that the bigger the holes in the pipeline, the more effort and resources you're going to put in there. Okay, and to me, is the kind of broad and deep assessment that one has to make of the educational process, because after all, it's a never-ending process. We're always learning. Even after you get whatever degree you get, you still have to continue updating your own skills so that you remain current in whatever profession you are, whatever occupation you have. And technology is going to be huge. It's already big, major, but it's going to be huge in our economy and the lives of people. And so Josue's point is very much on target, that we need to close that digital divide that is very deep and wide between Latinos and others. So that's where I see the private sector, especially the big technology companies, being part of the solution. And for that, they have to do more partnership work with colleges and universities, where most of these students are, and with K-12 schools. So why? Because they are, at the end of the day, the ones who are getting the labor force that comes out the other side of the pipeline for their own needs. And they want them to be prepared to hit the ground running and the kinds of things they do as companies. Well, what a best way to prepare that workforce than to partner more closely with those institutions, so that they can infuse in their curriculum the kind of content needed for them to do that effectively in those companies. So there has to be a closer relationship between the private sector and college universities, as well as K-12, to bridge that divide, because otherwise it's going to get wider, or it's only going to get wider if we don't do that.
And that's bad for the companies as well.
So that's my take on that. But again, the intervention points to me are those transitions that occur throughout the life of a student.
Yeah, and Claudia, chiming in a little bit to what Dr. Flores just mentioned. Clearly, I 100% agree that it has to be a lot of the private sector coming in, chiming in, getting there, form coalitions, form partnerships with higher education institutions, but also with governments. I would probably say, and nonprofits, they also come very handy. What we're trying to do here now in the Chance Zuckerberg Initiative, just to mention part of like the intervention process and, like where the handover and where we see some of the attrition that happens, is supporting some of the organizations that are right now conducting research on how important it is to, take at the stage where kids are when they do not necessarily have a lot of psychological safety, or they're coming from backgrounds where they're not necessarily as supportive in terms of well-being, even the way that you provide the support of the child as a whole is not there. And this is where in the CCI and the Chance Zuckerberg Initiative, on the part of education, we're looking at a concept that is called the whole child. And the whole child means the support that you need to have, not only from the academic perspective from the school, but also, things like having access to Wi-Fi, for example, that we didn't necessarily see that many low-income families couldn't necessarily have or afford that for their kids. So there are many organizations right now, nonprofits, and also education organizations that have realized this issue, and we're communicating with each other and saying what would be some of the things that we can do. This is where tech clearly has a potential advantage, or part in my views is a responsibility, as we are providing that future platforms of how kids will be learning, how kids will be interacting with the students, with their teachers, how kids will be looking at that skill set that is very, very much important and will play a big role, and not necessarily that degree that we have been using that for many, many years. And I think the skills is going to be a place where kids will see and will have that opportunity. And I would probably tell, like, you're always into action oriented, and I will save what I'm going to say in a second, to my closing, Claudia, because I think there's things that we can start doing right now.
And I am looking forward for that. And you both have mentioned the things that we really have heard again and again in every session, which is collaboration, partnerships, unification, getting together, doing more. And the other one is education, upward mobility. How do we get prepared for the future? How do we get how do we bridge the gap of education? So I think that we're in this space where we can start looking at what tools are available out there. Dr. Flores, I would love to offer you. We have the Hispanic Promise, which is backed by more than 20 Hispanic organizations and pledged by more than 180 companies. Those companies could easily be asked, could you establish a program of internships, mentorships, apprenticeships, and scholarships to work with organizations like HACU, so that we can actually just have a mechanism where we can say, okay, how do we make it easy? Because I think that a lot of the eyes are looking in the same way. So let's just find tools that are available that that could facilitate that. And I'd like to give you both an opportunity to give closing words and a call to action for those people in the audience that are listening, particularly from the private sector, other Hispanic organizations, and the media leaders, Hispanic young leaders that are part of the employee resource group. So many corporations listening and getting from you. What do you tell them? What's the call to action? What is the closing action-oriented thing that every one of us can do? Do you want to start, Josue?
Yes, thank you, Claudia. For me, a couple of things. Certainly for the audience, kids need us. Right now, there's still clearly a path. In front of us. There's so much work to do, but we can only get better if we unite. If we see the issues if we talk about them and we start ideating how can we and what can we do to start addressing some of those leaky transition buckets that we see. That for me is first and foremost. And for many corporations, what I also believe that there's so much that we can do is support some of our organizations like Europe, Genesis Works, and I know some of those organizations because we supported them in Salesforce. We support them here in the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. They are great nonprofits that are helping kids that do not necessarily have had the opportunity to go into a full college degree, and they have certain education backgrounds, but they do flourish because you allow that for one person. There's a multiplier effect. So there's things that we can do towards that. The other thing that I would say is reach out, to the nonprofits that are advancing education, that are advancing places where they pretty much see these leaky buckets that Dr. Flores was talking about. You can reach out directly to me. There's plenty of work that many of our grantees are looking for funding, and there's plenty of ways to do that. So take action, because we can only solve it if we unite and we're here together.
I could not agree more with Josue. And Claudia, thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this conversation. And my concluding comments have to do with three things. One is the fact that this country, the United States, the future of the nation is going to increasingly depend on how well we educate the Latino community to remain competitive in the global economy as a nation. Because more than half of the new workers joining the American labor force as we speak are Latinos and Latinas. And so to the extent that we succeed in that regard, America will succeed. The second point is that I think we need to also think of ourselves as an asset to this nation, and not as a burden. On the contrary, as a real asset, in that our language and culture enrich this nation and the world. And that we need to also instill that notion in our own younger generations so that they can become even more fully bilingual, bicultural, as they become doctors, as they become lawyers, as they become engineers or whatever, because it's the way the world is evolving into a global village. And the third thing is that I firmly believe that education is the main avenue, not the only avenue, but it's the main avenue to upward mobility in any society. And I'm not talking only about money or increasing your earnings. I'm talking about increasing your fulfillment as a person in life and enjoying everything that life has to offer to the fullest. And that comes through having the best education you can get. And so our young people need to understand that, yes, we want them to become better off than their parents and so forth, and that they have a chance to do that through education. But at the end of the day, we want them to be happy people too. And that comes through education. And by accomplishing those three things, I think we get to one of the key elements that we see emerging in this country, and that is the very important leadership roles the Latinos have to play in every aspect of life.
And for me, learning that Latinos have an upward mobility and a social mobility 3 times faster than any other group in the last 10 years is a clear result from the work that you, Dr. Flores, have done in HACU with a number of other leaders that have made us be as strong as we are and as ready as we are, as ready as we are to keep it going. So scaling up the education for every Hispanic is essential for America. And so I want to thank you both, Dr. Flores, President and CEO of HACU, and Josue, my dear friend, COO of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, from being here with us and for the work that you do. Thank you so much.